Okay, Esther chapter 1 today. Did a little bit of intro last week and to the book of Esther. I want to correct an error from last week that I need to fix. We were talking about the historic era in which Esther is based. And the king in Hebrew is Ahasuerus, which is in Greek Xerxes. And Xerxes the first is who we're talking about here. So the story of Esther is set in the reign of Xerxes the first, who is Ahasuerus. And his reign is about 486 or 485 through about 465 BC. That part I told you is right. I said wrongly, though, last week that his son was Xerxes II. That's not true. Xerxes II is his grandson, who reigned for part of 1 year. He had a short-lived reign, as many kings have had in the history of kings. In between them was Artaxerxes I, and he had a long reign as well. Artaxerxes was king during the era of Ezra, Nehemiah, and probably Malachi. So Esther is right before that as far as the historical era in which this book is set. So the era of Ahasuerus or Xerxes I. You may be asking the question, why does Ahasuerus look so unlike Xerxes? And the answer is a matter of languages. Not every language has the same letter combinations. Not every language has the same pronunciation available. And so actually the Persian word looks different from the Hebrew word, looks different from the Greek word. And then when you bring any of them into English, they each look different from each other. But we're pretty sure this is the same guy. Ahasuerus, Xerxes the first, is the one that's intended to be referred to here in the book of Esther. He tried to knock off Greece, and it didn't work. So he had a campaign from about 481 to 479 BC against the Greeks that ultimately didn't go well. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But we'll get a real good character sketch of Xerxes Ahasuerus here in the first 9 verses of our chapter of Esther 1. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to cover from last week. At the moment, I think we'll just let that sit until later. I wanted to say about our videos now, Facebook has changed their practice, so all of my videos automatically disappear from Facebook after 30 days. So what I've done is I've created a playlist on my personal YouTube channel, which is mostly littered with home videos and videos of trains. But I've created a playlist for Esther on my YouTube channel. I have linked that to the top of our church Facebook page where it will remain. You can click on that YouTube playlist and you can watch any of our Esther videos at any time. I'm chopping off the prayer requests at the beginning to get the confidential stuff out of there. And then but it also makes it shorter. So if you need to go back and watch anything, I know some of you do that. It'll be available 30 days on Facebook like normal, but you really want that link at the top of the page. Bookmark that on YouTube. Subscribe to my channel, like it, that sort of thing, and you'll get notifications when it pops up again. And then you can find them hopefully forever and ever, unless YouTube does the same thing that Facebook does, at which point I don't know what I'll do. If you want back videos going back to as far as the pandemic with Daniel, summer of 2020, I have all those on a flash drive. If you would like to have those, 128 gigs will cover everything the last 5 years. And I'd be happy to put that on a flash drive for you. You can view them later or listen to them if you're having a hard time falling asleep at night, these kind of things. We'll make them available to you. But Esther will be preserved on my YouTube channel for now, and we may come up with a better solution down the road, but that's just something to survive for a while. Any questions or comments about last week? We talked about the historical nature or not of Esther. We talked about what else did we talk about? We talked about God's not mentioned in Esther explicitly. We talked about the history of Esther getting to us being a little more complex than some of the other books of the Bible. Any questions that have been on your mind all week long? I can't wait for Wednesday to ask this. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
After that commercial, I was thinking, forget the $40 for the ministry.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I should have thrown that in there, Bill. For $19.95 plus shipping and handling, you can receive a right. But wait, there's more. If you get me a USB drive, I can put Revelation on there too. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it's a great commercial. Yes, Fred.
I heard that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Esther's left out.
Right. One of the things we talked about last week is that Esther was not found at Qumran. So a little bit of background here. I got to do background to help pull people back into this, and we'll get to your question. So what we have as far as the oldest Hebrew of the Old Testament that we had for a long time was the Masoretic text, 1000 A.D. And then there was a guy with his goats near the Dead Sea who found these caves with these scrolls, 1947. And in those caves, he found jars. In those jars, there were fragments of literature. And we basically have fragments, at least, of every book of the Old Testament in Hebrew except for Esther. So why did the people, and that was great for us because it really demonstrated that the Masoretic text around 1000 AD was really, really, really very well preserved from 200 BC or so. So that really gives us confidence, biblical scholarship, that sort of thing. Plus there were fragments at Qumran from other strands of the phone chain, so to speak, and so we're able to compare and contrast and discern likely original wording, all this other stuff for the Old Testament. It's great stuff. But Esther's not there. Why is Esther not there? Possibly Esther was simply written too late to be at Qumran. Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, Malachi are all probably some of our later books of the Bible. And Esther would have originated in Persia, so the Pony Express was a little bit ragged, something like this, doesn't get to Qumran. But more likely, the Qumranites did not care for Esther for whatever reason. One is they may have had their own liturgical calendar, we think they did, and the Feast of Purim, and one of the main points of the book of Esther is to promote the Feast of Purim being observed. There's some thinking that the Feast of Purim may have conflicted with something else in the calendar, so it's inconvenient. But more likely than that even is some of the content of Esther isn't really appealing to Qumranites, off in the wilderness there. So for example, Esther spending one night with the king, probably not up to moral scruples of the Qumran community. There's some other things that happen that are uncomfortable. We actually talked about not just Qumran, but really the history of Esther being embraced as part of the biblical canon. There's some hesitancy in Judaism, in early Christianity, and again at the Protestant Reformation, some hesitancy about Esther for a variety of reasons. Some of the thematic stuff that's in here is just a little bit tougher to swallow, and so they may not have liked some of the content, that sort of thing. Plus, God is not mentioned in the Hebrew text of Esther, and so maybe this is a godless book, although I think if you look at it with the right eyes, God's all over the place in the book of Esther. So does that get to your musing about Qumran? Yes, and more of that is on the video from last week, which, as I said, is both on YouTube and Facebook for right now. Other questions about last week that we have lingering? All right, well, let's read part of Esther today so we can actually claim we were studying the Bible. Esther 1 through 9 today. Some fun names in this one, but more fun names in the next passage. So if you want to, volunteer now and get it off your chest, we can, you can get somebody else in that one. Sandy will get this. Esther 1 verses 1 through 9.
This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes, and the nobles of the provinces were present.
Sandy. There, the first 9 verses of the book of Esther. The time of Xerxes or Ahasuerus, he was 486 to 465 BC. So in your sequence, another question came up last week. There is an Ahasuerus, a Xerxes in Daniel. There is a Darius in Daniel as well. Those are not, at least if we're taking Daniel and Esther both seriously as having some historical basis to them, those are not the same two guys. Darius the Mede in Daniel is quite possibly the same guy as Cyrus the Persian. Can't prove that, of course. That's a speculation, but there's some meat to that argument. But then he was preceded by a Xerxes or an Ahasuerus. In this case, you have Xerxes the first of Persia, whose daddy was Darius the first, who's the more well-known Darius. So anyway, Ahasuerus, Xerxes, and he's got a lot of territory, as you see here. 127 provinces. So I shared with you last week that among people who take the authority of Scripture seriously, there's some debate as to how historical Esther actually is. Is this history? Is this storytelling? Is it some combo in between? Obviously, none of our biblical books are documented the way that our current histories are. I mentioned last week my Lincoln biography that has exhaustive footnotes, endnotes in the back of the book about stuff. Obviously, they weren't doing that kind of documentation at that time. But I also think it says too little of Esther if it's simply historical fiction, like Tiffany's American Girl doll books, these plausible but not actually technically true stories. I think that's too weak, in my own opinion, since we're saying we should celebrate this feast year after year after year. I think it's more likely this is an historic sequence that actually happened, and our author is just having some fun telling the story, taking some liberties and things. We'll talk about some of that. Anyway, one of the reasons that people doubt the historical accuracy of the book of Esther is this comment about 127 provinces. The best history we have of the Persian era, the era of Xerxes, I should say, outside of Esther, is the work of Herodotus, who was a Greek historian operating about 25 years later. And he has Xerxes as having 20 satrapies, so satrap is a guy, satrapy is a piece of turf belonging to that guy. So his kingdom was divided, according to Herodotus, into 20 satrapies. Some of the other sources indicate maybe as many as 31 at different points in the Persian realm. So 127, like, well, that's way off. They didn't know what they're talking about. Well, the term provinces here is a little bit fluid. What size of area are we talking about? Daniel uses the same term to describe 120 sections of Cyrus's empire. Cyrus would predate, or actually that was Darius the Mede, which could be Cyrus, but that would predate this guy at any rate. It's possible, it's also, I think Ezra Nehemiah uses this term to describe Judah, which we know was less than a full satrapy, so he may be using it for a smaller unit. So it could be like a county township thing or a state county thing. Like we've mixed and matched our terms. We're not precise in our terminology because of time past, misunderstanding, that sort of thing. The other possibility here is 127. If in the biblical way of thinking, 12 represents your whole people, certainly in Israel it does, and multiply anything times 10, that makes it really significant, and tack on 7, which is a number meaning full or big, he might be using an exaggerated number here to make the point, and this is the point, regardless of everything I've just said, to make the point, this guy controlled an awful lot of land, and he was Lord, he was king over an awful lot of people. The provinces term could also refer to ethnicities or nationalities that are under his thumb. So anyway, the point is a lot of people report to Xerxes Ahasuerus directly or indirectly. From India to Kush, you say, where in the world is Kush? And it's a little bit fuzzy, actually, to the point where I gave up. Depending on what area you're looking at and what map you look at, how big was Kush? Probably safest to say Upper Nile region. Last week I said Egypt. That probably is selling it a little bit short. You're right, they have Ethiopia, but when you talk about Ethiopia then, and you talk about Ethiopia now, there's a little bit of geographic separation, maybe a bit of overlap, but Ethiopia now is further south than Ethiopia then. What we're probably talking about, I think, is somewhere in the Sudan range, but go up the Nile River really far, and that's where this guy's rule extended to. India may not be all the way down in the peninsula, but at least to the Indus River. We think the Persian Empire made it. But again, the point of all of that, however we understand the 127 or the provinces or India, Kush, this guy has control over a lot of land, and he is the most powerful man on the face of the earth at the time. Questions, comments about that dizzying sentence? Yeah, Pinky and the Brain would have really liked this guy because he basically had the world taken over here. Yeah, but he's got a lot of territory comes to him. Question?
Well, when you talk about provinces, if they looked at the number of like cities, states that they conquered, there could have been city states.
Yeah. I think you're talking about city states. We really don't know exactly what the author of Esther has in mind. Clearly, he does not have in mind the same size unit that Herodotus says there were 20 of, or other historians say there were 31 of. He's thinking on some other scale, but yeah.
Like you said, Judea at that time was all lumped in with a much larger area.
Right, and yet in Ezra and Nehemiah, they use this same word here in the Hebrew to describe Judah, which is smaller than a satrapy would have been. So there's some question about fluidity of terminology there and what we mean, but I wouldn't knock off the historical plausibility of Esther just on the basis of that number alone. I think that's a little bit stretching it, I think. Yes, Randy.
Well, I have a question, because most people who try to rule the world were not very good people.
Right, and neither was Xerxes. Xerxes was not a good guy. No. And now it's interesting. The histories that we have of Xerxes outside of the Bible are all very aggrandizing of Xerxes. But the character sketch we come across is probably not the kind of guy you want to be teaching your children's Sunday school classes. Okay, this is not someone you want your son to grow up and be like, unless you're only interested in world power. Then who cares? But Xerxes is not a noble guy. He's not a one-woman guy. He's not really hesitant to do violent things when he gets in a bad mood. And we'll get even more of a character sketch of him as we go along here. But yeah, Xerxes is not probably your best bet.
I have a question after, because he's throwing this big party, he's letting everybody come, including the peasants. So
Right, he's throwing the party here to show off. So we'll go, since you had the segue there, we're going to go, before we get to the party, we will get to the party. Verse 2 there, he reigned from his royal throne. We're wondering, the scholars are wondering, whether reigned is just, he was reigning from his throne, or whether it implies like he was reigning now finally at peace after having quelled a couple of rebellions. There were some other things going on in the empire. He may have just brought them to resolution, and so he may be reigning securely for the first time in a little bit, or the first time ever. We're just now entering into the third year of his reign here as this story picks up. So it's possible he is enjoying his reign now more than he was a few minutes earlier when he was trying to deal with some things. Yes, Liz? Not morally good, or how does history assess Xerxes? Not morally good, politically powerful, but ultimately he lost to Greece. He had this grand scheme which he may well have kicked off during this lengthy period of showing off. He may have cooked up this scheme with his generals while they were there drinking, but they went and tried to knock off the Greeks, and it didn't work very well. Now that's about as much as I can say with authority. I've not really delved into that. But Xerxes would not be known in the same way as Nebuchadnezzar or Cyrus before him, both of whom were really successful at expanding their domains, or Alexander the Great, who was Greek. I made it Greek. It's kind of a combination of Greek. Anyway, but Alexander later on was more well known for being a significant figure, although he died young, but he conquered the world while he was at it. But Xerxes was definitely a powerful guy. And what we read about Xerxes and Esther does not surprise us based on everything else written about Xerxes outside of this. I'm sorry, what?
consider him a minor warlord then?
If he was making war against me, I wouldn't consider him minor at all.
Well, you mentioned Alexander the Great.
He is not on the same scale of Alexander the Great. In fact, I would say that the mannerisms of Xerxes, as revealed in Esther, are part of the reason why his empire didn't long endure. Obviously he was succeeded by his son, another son, that sort of thing. But There's a reason that this Persian outfit didn't last. There's a reason that all of these outfits don't last. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, they all flop for the same reasons. Arrogance and complacency among their leaders. They do the same things throughout world history. Why do leaders fall? Why do nations fall? It's the same set of things, again and again. So anyway, Xerxes, he was great in terms of scope of power, not great in terms of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, ethics, that kind of thing. But makes for a great story. So here we are. Reign from Susa. So the Persian leaders maintain not one, not two, not three, but 4 capitals of their empire. Why have one when you can have 4, right? And this, my understanding, is kind of the winter capital, So when the weather was that way, they would go down there. The winter/spring capital in Susa, which is in western present-day Iran. That's where Susa is or was. And in his 3rd year, which would have been 384, 383, maybe 382 BC. I mentioned to you before the difficulty of this. A lot of our history of these kings is the 3rd year of so-and-so, the 7th year of so-and-so. Well, how are we counting that? Last Wednesday, I was in my 13th year of ministry here. This week, I'm in my 14th year. I mean, how do you count that? Do you count calendar years? Do you count actual start dates? And then in the 3rd year, is it early, is it late, that sort of thing. So 383, give or take, is the 3rd year of his reign. And he gives a banquet for all the king's horses and all the king's men. See this? Look at the end of verse 3 there. His nobles, his officials, his army, probably meaning his military leaders, the princes, the nobles of the provinces were there. Of Persia and Media. Persia and Media are related both ethnically and politically, and it's not within my understanding to tell you exactly what all that looks like. As I said in the book of Daniel, it's quite possibly that Darius the Mede is Cyrus the Persian. That would not be surprising. They have both of those names for the same royal figure. Near as I can tell, Persia and Media is a little bit like Prussian and German, and I'm confused about European history too, so that was maybe not a good analogy. But these are people groups that are related and connected, and their power kind of goes hand in hand. So the empire of the Medes and the Persians is kind of one of the same thing. Maybe you're an expert on Persia and Media. If you are, we can have lunch and you can enlighten me later on. But anyway, all of the powerful people from throughout his realm are gathered together for a great banquet. That's your opening shot, your first 3 verses. We've got this guy, Xerxes. We're in the 3rd year of his reign. He is controlling a huge amount of territory from India to Egypt/Sudan/Ethiopia, and he is having a party, a banquet for all of his officials and military leaders from throughout the Medo-Persian Empire. Questions? I should add in at this point probably that the average person in the Persian Empire was probably not doing really well at that time. The average person financially was probably not super well off, not enjoying great quality of living. Probably food was hard to come by for some of them. In other words, the ancient Near East was not a whole lot different than the current Near East, as far as a lot of people really hurting under some not very good leadership. So that is probably also happening in the background here, and that will be your contrast for what Xerxes does next. Let's go ahead and read verses 4 and 5 again. 4 and 5. Who wants verses 4 and 5? I think Randy was first. Esther 1, verses 4 and 5.
When he showed the riches of, now my translation is King James.
You're okay, go for it.
When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace, both unto great and small, even 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace.
Okay, so this guy has a banquet, and we're a little bit unclear here how many banquets are going on here. We had the opening shot. He has a banquet. He's invited all the powerful people to come for this banquet. And then he displays the vast wealth of his kingdom and splendor and glory for 180 days. Is this that feast that he invited all those powerful people to? If so, does it really last for half of a year? And now this is back to where we're into the end of the language of, okay, is this history, is this storytelling? But we went to the zoo in Fort Wayne yesterday with Tiffany and with her cousins, and I could say that there were 1 million people at the zoo yesterday. And I wouldn't be telling you the meticulous truth because there weren't, in fact, 1 million people at the Fort Wayne Zoo yesterday, but it was crowded. And so if I said there were 1 million people at the zoo, you wouldn't say, we doubt the historicity of Nathan's account of the zoo trip yesterday. We would say, we understand because we've been there to the zoo or Disney World or wherever when there were 1 million people there and it was really crowded. Actually, yesterday wasn't really quite 1 million people. It was better yesterday, but you understand the point. So, yes, sir.
Well, if his kingdom, empire, whatever, is that big, it's gonna take some time for all these people to travel.
Right,
from-
right. Yeah, maybe some travel times included here. For 180 days, he is showing off.
Yeah.
Whether the feast was served for 180 days or not, we don't know. It's possible that was one kind of banquet for 180 days, and then we can understand our storyteller to be having some fun telling the story at that point. A long period of time of a fancy banquet, followed by then a 7-day banquet for everybody in the kingdom. I mean, everybody from the least to the greatest. And by everybody, we mean the men at this point, because we find out the women had a separate banquet later. But it's possible there was 180 days of feasting for the prominent people, and then 7 days for everybody. Or it's possible he had like a 180-day showing off of his wealth, culminating in the banquet, verse 5, which is the same banquet as verse 3. And it turns out not just the power people are there, but also men of all classes are invited as well. Yes, Randy.
I was just gonna say, I figured out why his reign didn't last very long, he just wasted his money.
He wasted his money, yeah. His reign did last actually 20 years, so that's not too bad, lengthwise. But he was definitely, especially, so what kind of view are we developing of Xerxes from a biblical standpoint? If we know that a lot of people in his empire were hurting, and here he is having these extravagant feasts showing off his wealth. What kind of guy is this? How are we evaluating him? So there's no question how the author of Esther wants us to assess King Xerxes. This is a guy who is all about himself. But this is the way ancient kings had to work. You have to show off a bit. How legitimate is your power? Look at the kind of feast I can throw. Look at the kind of wealth I have to show off. Yes, Bill, you got to.
Well, the 180 days could be like us today having an open house, which starts at noon and closes in.
Right. It just when I do an open house.
So people come in during
Right.
that period of time.
Right.
Because they have a long travel and whatnot.
Right.
They come in during that period of time, stay a while, eat, drink, be merry, and
Sure.
then
Sure.
leave after.
Sure, maybe like an open house, people coming and going. We don't really know how to understand that. But once again, I wouldn't take the 180 days and say, oh, he made up the story. I mean, I think there are explanations for why a long time he's showing off. And that's the point. And look at all the extravagant details that are given on down to verses 6 and 7 about the fanciness of his palace, the extravagance of everything being done. This guy is wealthy and he knows it and he's showing off. And that's why this either one banquet or two banquets are being held, is to show off his greatness. I might add that the enclosed garden, the Persian kings were well known for their gardens, and so this was a fancy thing as well. He is putting that on display too. He's not pulling the weeds himself, by the way. But go ahead, yes, Liz. Exactly. Exactly.
By inviting all these, different groups in or whatever, yes, it's definitely a selfish thing, but again, from like a political standpoint, maybe
Right.
it's just, I'm trying to make sure you know what you're dealing with here in this.
Right. When world leaders invite other world leaders over to their palaces or mansions for banquets, it's never just because I'm such a great guy. There's always an angle. And as Liz is saying, he's got a big empire to try to hold together here. So how convenient it would be for his political interests to bring the nobles and satraps, officials, wherever, from all over the empire, bring them together and really wine them and dine them and show off my wealth and impress them and get them to be grateful for me, and now I'm going to be loyal to this guy. That is probably part of what's going on for sure. He is definitely playing up his image, his greatness. He is drawing people in that way. Yeah, oh sure, for sure. Yeah, there is no, anytime anybody comes to the White House or Buckingham Palace or wherever else, there's an angle. You know, it's not just I'm being a nice guy. There's an angle there. And that was true in ancient times as now. So, yeah, there's always a reason for the invite list. So, meanwhile, if I have you over just because I like you, you know, so there's no angle there. But anyway, that's what's going on here. What else have I missed in the text here? Any questions so far we have about Xerxes and his fancy feast? A lot of banqueting going on in this era in history. What'd you say? Yeah, he's got unique cups. So somebody, Liz, you go ahead and read it now. Verses 6 and 7 again. Go for it.
For there are beautifully decorated white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cord and purple ribbons, silver rings, embedded in marble pillars. The couches stood on mosaic pavement, ornamented with marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and in abundance of royal wine, reflecting the king's generosity.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what's the song from The Sound of Music? Raindrops on Roses and Whispers on Kittens. You know, we could just imagine her singing this whole lengthy thing about all of these are a few of Xerxes' favorite things. Yes, Fred.
There was a guy in Daniel that was throwing the party, you know, and they're writing on the wall. This is way before.
Yes. So Belteshazzar, who was basically his dad was king, but he was in town and his dad was off doing whatever. So Belteshazzar was the right-hand man of the king. Daniel then becomes third in power, basically, to Belteshazzar. But
At that time, the Persians took over.
right. So Belteshazzar has this extravagant feast in the book of Daniel. He's drunk, he's extravagant, he's showing off, he's complacent, he's not aware of what's going on. And his downfall is going to come swiftly right after that, just a matter of maybe the next day or something. So, yes, it has happened before when a biblical audience sees a king who's showing off his wealth, showing off his splendor, getting people fat and drunk. We expect this is not going to turn out well for him, or we're at least supposed to evaluate this guy negatively. And so we've got an idea here that the biblical author does not care for Xerxes at this point in the story, for sure. So, by the king's command, verse 8. So the word command here, there's a lot of decrees that happen in the Persian Empire. Both Daniel and Esther indicate to us that once the king makes a decree, it's irrevocable. There is no evidence of that outside of Daniel or Esther. However, it does not seem far-fetched that he would have that kind of rule. The problem is you get caught up in your own rules this way. I made a rule, it's irrevocable. You were drunk, you're going to regret it, right? But this is what he does, and his decree is basically any man, and at this point it's not just the powerful, it's the men of society from the least to the greatest. Any man can drink as much as he wants. And so there is a lot of drinking going on at this party. This is very, very important. Keep in mind, the events you're about to witness are happening among people who are totally drunk. That's going to help us understand. And some of them if you're taking a literal understanding of the 180 days, which, like I say, is a little bit dubious, but you're getting 187 days of drinking. These are not men in their right mind, which explains what the queen refuses to do next. Verse 9, what was Queen Vashti doing during this feasting by the men? What did she do? Verse 9. Somebody read it. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes.
Yeah, a women's banquet. And how much detail are we given about this women's banquet? Not very much. And that's intentional. That's intentional, okay? They probably had some good food, but the narrator is deliberately drawing a contrast between the extravagance of Xerxes and the brevity of Vashti's feast here. The women are with Vashti, and the men are doing this other thing, and the men are all really, really drunk. And that's going to set the stage for what happens next. Vashti. So back to our how historical is Esther debate. One of the concerns with the historicity of Esther is the omission of some of the key names from other histories of this time period. So Xerxes, Ahasuerus, is well established. We know a lot about him. But there is no mention outside of the book of Esther of Vashti or of Haman or of Esther or maybe of Mordecai. Now, as I said last week, Mordecai is a Hebrew version of the Babylonian name Marduk. They had a god, and Marduk was one of the gods. So it would not be surprising that, as happens today, you move to a different culture, you take on a name that's more like what they would say for the sake of pronunciation and paperwork and all this other stuff. So Mordecai is a Hebrew version of a Babylonian god name. So the name Mardukas or those kind of variations do show up in history. So it's quite possible that Mordecai's name is actually mentioned at one place in the history. But these other main players are not mentioned in the history. Why is that? Well, as Bill mentioned last week, when these histories are written of these kings, they tend to be written by winners and tend to be written to make the king look good. This book of Esther does not make King Xerxes look good. You're picking up on that already, right? This does not make him look good. So, and this is particularly written from a Jewish perspective to establish this Feast of Purim. It has that interest, which a Greek historian would not care about that. The Persian Empire would not care about that either. So we're highlighting some events that may be significant from a Jewish perspective that were not significant from the other perspectives. Yes, Randy?
It's funny because though if you read it with a clear mind, you can tell that it's highlighting, like it's almost written to make him look like he's stupid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no
It's
question.
like, oh, you're at this lavish party, but if you don't read between lines, you would know really it's just make him look amoral and debaucherous and things like that. Like,
Yes,
But
yes.
it's written almost in a way that if he would have discovered it, he wouldn't have been like, oh, kill the person or whatever.
Right. Xerxes is being foolish, and the narrator knows it, and Xerxes doesn't. And he wants us to know how to see it. Queen Vashti, though, back to the point I was on there, is that Queen Vashti's name is not mentioned in the secular history. So what do we do with that? It is possible that maybe Vashti is the same person as Amistris, who we know was the queen of Xerxes at this time from Herodotus. And that was, I think you had a footnote last week in your Bible that alluded to Amistris, possibly. Is Vashti the same person as the historical Amistris who we know about, who is queen at this time? It's possible she is, and your fun reconstruction of events is right here, if they're the same person. So we know a few things about Amistris. One thing is Amistris gave birth to Artaxerxes I. That was her third son. He will become king after Xerxes dies. So we know that Amistris was a queen of Xerxes, and that they had a third son who was Artaxerxes I, who becomes king after this, as I mentioned earlier. And he plays in Ezra and Nehemiah. He's in that era of history. What else do we know about this? Well, Vashti, we know here, is about ready to anger Xerxes significantly, and a harsh decree will be made that she's going to be replaced as queen. We know that piece of information from Esther. Maybe the same person, maybe not. We know that Amistris goes with Xerxes on his little campaign against the Greeks, which goes poorly. And on the way back, Amistris gives Xerxes a robe as kind of a gift, maybe trying to butter him up again, if in fact the Esther story with Vashti is the same thing that happened to her. So that happens. She gives him a robe. Xerxes, not being a particularly faithful guy, receives the robe, which is a gift from his wife, a homemade gift from his wife, no less, and gives it to his niece in an effort to solicit an affair with her. Meanwhile, Xerxes has already tried to have an affair with this girl's mother, his sister-in-law, and now he's going to try to have an affair with his niece. And in order to woo her, he gives her the robe that Vashti had given to him, or Amistris had given to him. So that happens as well. Is Amistris Vashti? I don't know for sure, but this is possible reconstruction here. So what happens is that Amistris was not a nice woman. So if you look at her history, some of the things that she did was she had some youth buried alive, like 18 of them at the same time. She had a bunch of people beheaded. She had some people crucified, this kind of thing. So when Xerxes initiates an affair with his niece using the robe that Amistris had given to him, Amistris takes, I'll say, violent revenge against this niece's mother, who's another lady that Xerxes tried to run around with for a while. And so it's quite possible that violent revenge did not sit well with Xerxes, and that was really the end of the end as far as Amistris and Xerxes having any kind of relationship, which would then make sense for him to get back from his Greek campaign in his 7th year, which is the same year that Xerxes says, I'm done with Vashti here. I'm going to go look at my harem and see who I can find as a new queen. That's where Esther comes in. That sequence is a possible sequence, and if Amistris is just another name for Vashti, well, then it would make sense that this rash, drunken thing that'll happen here in just a bit, this decree that she's going to be replaced would fit, and then the robe might be a bribe to get back in good favor, and then when he uses the robe to try to start an affair, and Vashti responds violently, that's the last straw with this Vashti. We know that Xerxes is forgetful with his own decrees. He does this later in the book of Esther as well. So it's almost like, oh, I forgot how angry I was at her for not doing the thing I wanted to do in Esther chapter 1. And so now we're really going to be done with her. It's possible Amistris and Vashti are the same person. We talked a moment ago about how Persian names, Hebrew names, Greek names, English names, spelling differences can be accounted for a variety of reasons. It's possible Vashti is Amistris. I can't prove that to you. If not, it's certainly possible that Xerxes carried more queens than we knew about because, as I said earlier, he was not a particularly monogamous individual. Questions or comments about that fun line of speculating? A guy named J.S. Wright is the guy who's done your work on Vashti and Amistris possibly being the same person. Can't prove it, can't disprove it, but it would possibly fit. All right, let's keep reading now, verses 10 through 12. Fred will have this, verses 10 through 12. This is fun with Persian names here in these verses. Esther chapter 1, verses 10 through 12.
On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Meeting, Biztha, Arboga, Bigtha, Abidah, Zethar, Carpus, and eunuchs who served in the presence of the king Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him.
Okay, there you go. That was the event I referred to just a moment ago. It begins the series of events where he decides he wants to replace Vashti. So, seventh day of this feast. So Xerxes' heart is merry with wine. You may be familiar with what people tend to behave like when their hearts are merry with wine. And so again, our narrator is being deliberately derogative. He's having fun telling the story here. His heart was merry with wine, and he got his whole, his 7 eunuchs together. So a eunuch is a man who has been biologically modified so he can't reproduce with anyone in the king's harem. That's what's going on here. Yeah. What did you say? Yeah, possibly so. Yes. So a eunuch is generally speaking is someone who's been modified so they can't do it. Again, not because sexual immorality is really concerned in the courts of ancient Persia, but because producing heirs means claims to power and this sort of thing. So we're controlling who can be involved in this producing lineage type of thing. So 7 eunuchs. 7 is a full number, and actually. We'll have 7 counselors in a little bit, and there is some evidence from other sources that other kings of this time carried 7 counselors. So 7 eunuchs, 7 counselors, all of this fits the extravagance of King Xerxes. And what are these men sent to do? They're supposed to do what? Bring the queen. Why? She's pretty. That's exactly right. And she's gotten prettier in their imagination because their hearts are merry with wine, right? Okay, now, I don't want to move into, not everything in the Bible is G-rated, you know this, and I'm not going to lead a whole bunch of wild speculation here. But if a drunken feast full of men from every rank in society want a woman to come and be paraded before them, there's a good chance this isn't just like show and tell at preschool, okay? So this is probably going to be an uncomfortable, awkward situation for her to enter into that we would all be deeply scandalized by. And she's like, I'm not having it. I am not going to go and be looked at because I'm so pretty by the king and all of his drunk. I mean, she knows what's been going on in this room over there, and I'm not doing it, she says. Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, really, depends. This is where the narrator's numbers here, if they are literally accurate, and he's not just saying there were 1 million people at the zoo, then this is a really irrational bunch of men, and she's not going to go. Because look at this. This puts her right in line with the linen, the gold, the goblets, everything else. He's just showing off all the stuff he's got. And look at this. I've got this woman who's pretty to look at. Same thing, yes.
I think there've been a lot of songs, country songs, written about how everybody looks good at closing time.
That's right. That's right. As Jeff is saying, a lot of country songs have been written about this very type of thing, right? So this is Vashti being asked to do something that will be highly uncomfortable for her. It will not be really honoring for her. It'd be a feather in Xerxes' cap. And there's a chance that some less than desirable activities would happen to her when she's drawn into this room of men whose hearts are very merry with their wine. So she says
Things have
no.
improved since then, aren't you?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, we really, there is room for improvement in our world's treatment of women, yet today we have, at least in our society, advanced in general beyond this. However, there are certainly horrible things that are still happening, and I'm not going to pretend they don't happen. But yeah, we don't want to replicate this for sure. So we have just found out how powerful Xerxes is, right? He's in charge of everybody everywhere, from the river Nile to the river Indus. And so saying no to him, probably, how does that generally go? If you say no to Xerxes, how does that work out for you? Right, not good. Yeah, not good. We've got that figured out. And so when the attendants delivered the king's command, verse 12, Queen Vashti refuses to come, and the king is furious and burning with anger, and he is angry drunk. Don't lose sight of that. He is angry drunk. Yes, Liz.
Just like putting myself in the position of Vashti for a minute. I mean, she has to know. Like, she is in a no-win.
She certainly is in a no-win situation.
Can't not go. Like,
Right.
because she, I mean, do you think she even thought she could get killed for this?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Did Vashti know she could get killed for this? Yes, no question.
I just feel so, I mean,
Yeah.
she's a horrible woman.
So, as I said last time, she's really a courageous figure, especially from our cultural standpoint, where we have developed, I would say probably rightly, we've developed some heightened sensitivity about sexual abuse and misconduct and these sort of things, and we have begun to take the stories of victims more seriously, and we've begun to think it's disgusting when some of these powerful people do all kinds of horrible stuff. Like, we've really taken this more seriously, and here's this woman standing up for herself saying, I won't be objectified that way, even if it means my death. And that's basically what she's saying. So we have a high view of the character Vashti at this point in the story, I think.
How did she figure death was better than whatever happened to her if she went? I mean, why else would she?
Yes, I'd rather die than go to your drunken feast full of men whose hearts are merry with wine. Right. This is all we know about Vashti for sure. Now, if Vashti is amorous, we know a lot of other things, many of which are not that great. But at least from this point, the author of Esther wants us to think well of Vashti, I think, at this point. And only not for the purpose of extolling her, but for the purpose of making Xerxes look even worse than he actually is, or as bad as he actually is. So yes, that's where we are so far. So what we're going to talk about next week then is the council of the king. He's going to call in 7 other drunk men to help him decide what to do with his rebellious wife. And basically, just to give away next week, they're going to decide the women of the Persian Empire are the problem. That's their conclusion. These drunk men who have been drinking for an inordinate number of days, their conclusion is going to be, Vashti is just evidence that the women are the problem, and we need to tell the men to rule their women with an iron fist. That is going to be their great solution to this defiance from Vashti. Did it work well for them? Stay tuned. Come back next week to see how that goes when they decide. Right. Yeah, seriously. So at this point, though, with Xerxes, how are we feeling about this guy? How are we feeling about King Xerxes after the first 12 verses of Esther? He's very stupid, yeah, right. He's become stupid with his great power. He's arrogant, a bloated ego, right? Objectifying his wife as another trophy,
Every step he takes is just a flex of it.
Right. So we who have been well versed in the biblical tradition don't look well upon this guy, but this is not surprising for a king then or now, really. an ancient, powerful king, or even a not so ancient king, to act this way. And we know, because we've read that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble, that this is not going to work out well ultimately for Xerxes. Yes. Liz.
So when you asked that question, my first thought was he's living as if he's someone who has no accountability, which
He's living as though he's someone who has no accountability.
which in essence he doesn't. I mean, who
Right.
would he report to other than, if he reports of God or Abraham or whatever.
Right.
But I guess just to bring it back to us,
Yeah.
like then we have a lot of things at our disposal.
Right.
We can kind of
Yeah.
control, we can, if we have more money than we need or whatever, like, we can often get into that.
That's right. That's right. So what Liz says is the most important line of conversation we've had yet today, which is when we look at Xerxes, we see what wealth and power can do to us. And we'll begin to live without accountability and just go with whatever feels good and whatever shows off, whatever makes people think good of us and that thing. So don't miss this. When we read these critiques of these powerful men and their powerful empires, the most powerful empire in the world right now is the one that we're living in. And the wealthiest people in the world is us. You say it's not us, it's that guy, in Carmel with a mansion or whatever. No, it's us. Like compared to most of the people in the days of Esther, or most of the people around the world today, we are the filthy rich people who have all kinds of linens and goblets and alcohol and whatever else. And so the warning of Scripture continuously, when we see Xerxes, if we just stop at shaking our heads at Xerxes and saying, well, he was a loser, without doing some introspection, how has my wealth, how has my power, how has my comfort influenced me and caused me to think and act and live, then we've short-circuited what the Holy Spirit wants us to do. So whenever you see a critique of a biblical character, and there are many, of course, we want to say, okay, search me, O God, and know my heart. Is there any Xerxes in me? And frankly, I don't rule over territory from the River Nile to the Indus River. I don't have that kind of power, And I don't actually drink. I did have alcohol at a Lutheran church one time. They had communion. But there's room for us to scrutinize ourselves as far as wealth, power, and that attitude that Liz is talking about. That I am not accountable to anyone but me. And frankly, all of our advertising encourages us to have that kind of attitude. I'm not accountable to anyone but me. Yes, Randy.
It just reminds me of my favorite scriptures, Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, judge not that you be not judged.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we're supposed to judge ourselves, not.
Judge not that you not be judged, and it's real easy to see, because Xerxes is a characterization here, is an exaggeration here of what, the average person is. It's easy to miss that I might have a little bit of Xerxes in me. And the warning is, if you continue in the path of Xerxes unabated, you will look stupid, number one, and you'll come to nothing, number two. And both those things are in there. So, well, we will pick up next. What did you say, some Todd? I thought I heard a voice. No.
No, I want to make a message.
Okay, all right. And I don't want to cut off any good comments or questions. So we'll continue next week with verses 13 through 22 and decide and see what a group of drunken men decide to do with this sober-minded wife who refuses to go along with their fantasies. So let's pray together and then we'll dismiss. Lord, we thank you for this word, and I pray, Lord, that you would help us to scrutinize ourselves, that there would be no Xerxes in us, that we would be sober-minded, that we would have proper perspective about the wealth that we have, and that we would use it to your glory, not our own. I pray for wisdom and discernment in that. I pray for open ears and eyes and hearts as we continue through this journey, that we would not just shake our heads at Xerxes and Haman and that sort of thing, but that we would be shaped by your critique of them to your glory. I thank you for each one here. I pray you help us to be your faithful witnesses this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye to online. Remember, all these will be archived on my YouTube channel, which is going to be tagged to the top of the Facebook page if you want to go back and watch these later on.